Herbert Richard Baumeister, behind his identity as a businessman, also hides the dark side of an unconvicted American serial killer. His violent, antisocial behavior and multiple personality disorder cast a shadow over his mental world. As a bisexual man, he has a wonderful family and a thoughtful wife who chooses to remain steadfastly by his side even though he suffers from schizophrenia. However, in unseen moments, he frequented gay bars, not only for the thrill of it, but also to pick out some victims to target for his murders. He would lure those victims to his home under various pretexts, then drug them with alcohol and take them to the basement of the house when they passed out. There, he used various brutal means to end their lives. After the incident, the police found video cameras in his house, which made it seem like he recorded the murders and watched them over and over again in the dead of night, or even sold them to other evil people. On top of that, the police thought he might have killed more than a dozen other people in the rural area between Indiana and Ohio along Interstate 70. But after he killed himself, all the clues disappeared like smoke, leaving only an endless mystery and mourning for those innocent lives. On April 7, 1947, an anesthesiologist and his wife had their first kid, Herbert, in an Indianapolis hospital. His childhood isn't documented a lot, but he shouldn't be described as if he had a normal, peaceful life. For one thing, he lived in an area that was very chaotic, had frequent violent crime, and as we all know, it's basically impossible for a child who grows up the usual way to act antisocially when they reach puberty. As a teenager, Herbert did a bunch of shocking things. There were reports that his classmates found out about his interest in dead animals, and on one occasion, he even snuck a dead crow onto his teacher's desk. On top of that, one of the things he would often ponder on was his desire to experience what it would be like to taste human urine. There were also rumors that he showed very strong disruptive tendencies, not just disrupting the classroom, but also urinating on the teacher's desk. So his parents got a call from the school, and then his dad took him to see a bunch of psychiatrists. During that time, he did a bunch of psychiatric evaluations and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Some of the psychiatrists thought he might have multiple personality disorder, but he didn't get any more treatment, which is weird because people with schizophrenia have a distorted idea of reality. They have delusions and hallucinations and disorganized behaviors, and they need lifelong therapy to control themselves. Because of all this, in high school he was virtually, and no one wanted to touch him. Herbert enrolled at Indiana University in 1965, but dropped out after just one semester because of a mental health issue. In 1967, he returned to Indiana University, this time with his father's support, and studied anatomy. There, he also met his future wife, Juliana Sater, who was a part-time student and also held a career as a high school journalism teacher. They had the same interests and really conservative political views, so they started dating. They later got married in November 1971, but 6 months later, his dad sent him to the loony bin for 2 months because he had another psychotic break. Juliana said her husband was hurting inside and he needed help and companionship, so she'd always be there for him. They had 3 kids together, and Juliana later said that in more than 25 years of marriage, they'd only had sex 6 times, and she'd never seen Herbert naked. After graduating, Herbert did a bunch of odd jobs, and he still acted very strangely. At the time, he got a job with the Indiana Department of Motor Vehicles. His coworkers there called him eccentric, arrogant, and aggressive, and he was known to sarcastically greet other staff members. One year, he sent his coworkers a Christmas card with a picture of him and another man, both dressed in holiday attire, so they whispered behind his back that he was a lunatic and a closet homosexual. But despite all that office gossip, he was promoted to become the program director. Unfortunately, his mental health issues got the better of him, and he was fired from his job after peeing in a letter to the governor of Indiana. In 1985, Herbert became a father of 3 young children, and Juliana became a full-time mom. But when he was fired from the Department of Motor Vehicles, Juliana returned to her job, and he took over the care of the home and children. In September, Herbert was caught drunk driving by the police, and 6 months later he was charged with stealing a friend's car and conspiracy to commit larceny. But because he suffered from mental illness, he went unpunished, and in the meantime he frequented a number of gay bars. In some time, he got a job at a thrift store, and he realized that this way of running a store had the potential to make money. While working there, he studied how it was done and imitated it, until, in 1988, he took a $4,000 loan from his mother and opened his own thrift store. By the time the first store started making a lot of money, Herbert gave some of the profits to a local charity, the Children's Bureau of Indianapolis. And then, pretending to work with the charity, he made more money and splurged on an 18-acre mansion called Fox Hollow Farms, which had an indoor swimming pool, and also opened a second thrift store. Herbert's murder case is so complex that it requires a two-part narrative. The first part involves a serial killer who committed a number of murders on Interstate 70 in Indiana and Ohio between 1980 and 1991. These murders are collectively known as the I-70 Strangler cases. Michael Sean Petrie, a 15-year-old who worked as a prostitute, was reported missing on June 7, 1980. He had been hanging out in gay bars for a lot of his life, and 3 days later, witnesses said they saw him leaving in someone else's car in another part of town. 6 days later, his body was found on the outskirts of Hamilton County, Indiana. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was confirmed as strangulation and that no drugs or alcohol were detected in his blood. This suggests that he most likely died a slow death in a fully conscious state. Morris Allen Taylor, 22-year-old, a homeless man living in the boiler room of an Indianapolis apartment building who, due to financial difficulties, offered sex outside of surrounding gay bars, was found on July 21, 1982. His half-naked body in Weasel Creek in rural Hamilton County, Indiana. His body remained unidentified for 8 months after its discovery because his mother was hospitalized for mental health issues at the time of his disappearance. Delvoyd Lee Baker, 14-year-old, who had been offering sex at gay bars for $20 to $23 a night for the 3 months prior to his death, was found half-naked on October 3, 1982, near a river in Hamilton County, Indiana. As police investigated his death, his parents revealed that he had ridden his bike downtown the night he disappeared and called home at 10:30 p.m., telling them he would be home late because he planned to go to the movies. One witness said that on the night of October 2nd, he got into a blue van driven by a young white man with a thick beard. Michael Andrew Riley, 22-year-old, disappeared without a trace on May 28, 1983, after a night out. 8 days later, his body was found in a ditch in Hancock County, southeast of Greenfield. A witness said he'd been with an unidentified man and left the nightclub with him. 15 years later, a local resident contacted the police, claiming Herbert was the man. Eric Allen Roetker, 17-year-old, was reported missing on May 7, 1985, and his parents said he was supposed to go to interviews for summer jobs that day, but he didn't show up to any. One witness said they saw him at a bus stop early that morning, but instead of waiting for a bus, he got into a car that passed by. A few days later, his half-naked body was found near a stream in rural Preble County, east of Lewisburg, Ohio. An autopsy revealed burn marks on his left shoulder, and the cause of death was strangulation. Michael Allen Glenn, 29-year-old, lived apart from his parents. He lived alone in a trailer park in suburban Indianapolis and worked odd jobs every day to make ends meet. His body was found in a ditch near Eaton, Ohio, on August 15, 1986. He was wearing only a pair of underpants, and the cause of death was also strangulation. However, due to technological limitations, his identity was not confirmed until several years later through fingerprint matching. James Boyd Robbins Jr., 21-year-old, went missing around 10 p.m. on October 15, 1987, after leaving his mom's place and heading out on the road. 2 days later, his half-naked body was found in a ditch in rural Shelby County. During the investigation, 2 witnesses gave conflicting information. One said he saw a red Jeep Wrangler Renegade near the scene of the crime, while the other said it was a Chevrolet Blazer. In May 1989, Jean Paul Talbot's body was found near a stream in Defiance County, Ohio, and like the other victims, the cause of death was strangulation. Stephen Lynn Elliott, 26-year-old, who left his home and started working as a sex worker in 1979 after coming out as gay and getting hooked on booze, was found half-naked in the countryside near Interstate 70 in Preble County on August 12, 1989, and his cause of death was strangulation. On August 14, 1990, Clay Russell Boatman, a 32-year-old nurse practitioner, disappeared after leaving his apartment to go to a local gay bar. His body was found in a ditch near Eaton, Ohio, by a group of kids. In interviews with the media, his family denied that he was gay. Thomas Ray Clevenger Jr. grew up in an impoverished neighborhood and relied on providing sex in local gay bars to earn a living. On September 6, 1990, at the age of 18, he mysteriously disappeared. His half-naked body was later found on an abandoned railroad track near Greenville, Ohio. After his death, his family denied his status as a sex worker and refused to accept the results of the police investigation. On August 6, 1991, the body of Otto Gary Becker, a 42-year-old nurse practitioner, was found in a ditch next to a gravel road in rural Henry County, Indiana. While investigating his murder, police identified several witnesses who claimed to have seen him and another male traveling north on Interstate 70 near Indianapolis. When the witnesses were brought to the police station, the police showed them pictures of various criminals convicted of kidnapping and murder in the state, but none of them looked like the alleged kidnapper, who was also the last victim on Interstate 70. A lot of people who know about the case say that because Herbert bought the mansion at Fox Hollow Farm, his murders were moved there. So the rest of the story is all about the mansion. In 1994, Herbert's son was playing in the backyard when he found a complete, partially buried human skeleton. He told his mom about it, and Herbert said it was his father's, an anesthesiologist, doing some dissection during a study. He then said he found it while cleaning out the garage and decided to bury it there. Meanwhile, a detective named Virgil Vandegrift shows up. He used to be a sheriff's deputy, but after he retired, he opened a private investigation clinic that focused on missing persons cases. In June 1994, the mother of 28-year-old Alan Broussard contacted Virgil, and she asked him to look into her son's disappearance. Since her son was gay, the police didn't take the case seriously, so she had to come to Virgil. She said that her son had been on his way to a gay bar the night he disappeared, but that she had questioned the bar's management and that her son had not been there. A week later, Virgil was approached by another client whose son had also disappeared. The client was a 32-year-old gay man named Roger Goodlett, who had also disappeared after going to a gay bar. Since the two cases were so similar, both in terms of age, looks, sexual orientation, and basically how they disappeared, Virgil decided to work on both cases at the same time. He first contacted Roger and Alan's friends, co-workers, and people who frequented the gay bar, and then distributed posters with Roger and Alan's pictures on them. A few days later, someone said they'd seen Roger get into a blue car with Ohio license plates the night he disappeared. Meanwhile, the publisher of a gay magazine contacted Virgil to tell him about the serial murders on Interstate 70 that the police were investigating because the victims were gay. So Virgil figured these weren't just any disappearances, but a serial murder. So he tried to get the police department to take Roger and Alan's disappearance seriously. But everyone was pretty negative about homosexuality, and the police officers weren't any better. They weren't into investigating cases in the gay community. So Virgil's investigation was stuck until one of Roger's friends got in touch with him. This guy, Tony, said he was sure he'd seen the guy responsible for Roger's disappearance that night. He went to the police and the FBI, but they didn't take him seriously. That's why he found Virgil. He says he met a strange guy at a gay club that night, and the guy didn't talk to anyone else or drink, but he kept looking at a poster with Roger's picture on it. He thinks this guy could have something to do with Roger's disappearance, so he goes over and introduces himself and has a conversation. The man says his name is Brian Smart, a landscaper who's in Ohio working on a garden for a local mansion. Tony asks him if he knows Roger, but Smart says no. He's just curious about the poster. As the late night went on, Smart said that the house he was working on was huge and had a swimming pool where he currently lived. Since the owner wasn't home, he invited Tony to hang out there, saying they could use the pool and do some fun things. Tony agreed to the invitation, and then Smart took him to the mansion in a Buick with Ohio license plates. Virgil asked what part of the country the house was in, but Tony explained that he wasn't sure exactly where the house was because he didn't know the area very well. He just remembered the car driving around for a long time, and that it was a suburb that seemed to be in a pasture, and that there was a wooden sign hanging at the entrance with a couple of words on it, and one of them was farm. Tony said they went in through the side door, and he was shocked to see trash all over the place, like an abandoned house that hadn't been cleaned. Then they went to the pool area, which was weird and had a bunch of mannequins, like it was set up for a party, which was creepy. Smart seemed to know the place well, though. He went straight to the liquor cabinet and got Tony a drink, but Tony said he wasn't feeling it, so said no. Then the vibe got pretty awkward. Smart made an excuse to leave, but came back 10 minutes later. He got all worked up, acting like he'd been doing something shady, and started flirting with Tony in a weird way, talking about some kind of masturbation move called autoerotic asphyxiation. Tony grabbed a hose and started strangling Smart like he asked, even as he masturbated, which looked like he was enjoying it. When he was done, Smart said it was his turn. Tony wasn't interested, but when Smart was using the hose to strangle him, he realized that Smart was using so much force that it looked like he was trying to strangle him. So Tony pretended to faint and said he wanted to see what Smart was trying to do. When Smart saw Tony in a coma, he looked pretty freaked out, dropped the hose and started searching for something. Tony, realizing something was off, faked waking up because he was afraid that if he waited until Smart got a knife, he'd actually be killed. When Smart saw that Tony was awake, he got a panicked look on his face and claimed he didn't mean to do that. Tony didn't say anything and just asked Smart to take him home. Before they went their separate ways, Smart also asked to meet Tony the following week. When he finished the story, he told Virgil he was scared. Virgil thought about it for a while. He then said that Smart's actions did seem like he was trying to kill him just because he was so big. And the drink could have had a hypnotic drug in it, so if he had drank it, he could have been strangled for real. Virgil was starting to think Smart was up to something, so he asked Tony to keep the date going with Smart while he got some people to watch over Tony, but Smart never showed up again until it was time for the date to start. The investigation has hit a wall, so Virgil goes back to the local police for help. This time, he finds Mary Wilson, a detective who's been working with missing persons for years. They'd worked together for ages, so they knew each other pretty well. Mary drove Tony right away, and they wandered around the neighborhood trying to find the house from that night. But even though a whole year had passed, Virgil and Mary hadn't been able to find the house that Tony had described, and they weren't even close to finding any sign of Roger and Alan. It wasn't until August 1995 that Tony gave them a new lead when he contacted Virgil and claimed that he had seen Smart again and had taken down his license plate number. Then, after Mary got the plate number, she checked the police database and found that it belonged to a local businessman named Herbert. So she started investigating him. The more she looked into him, the more she and Virgil agreed that he was the killer because he had a bunch of mental illnesses and antisocial behaviors, which are exactly what expect from a serial killer. So Mary and Virgil head to Herbert's thrift store and try to get him to let them search his place, but he refuses and tells them to go talk to his lawyer. But they're not about to give up. Instead, they find Juliana and try to get her to help them. However, Juliana, who's still in love with her husband at this point, is convinced that Herbert can't be a criminal, so she also refuses their request. Rebuffed, Mary has to go to the police department to obtain a search warrant, but she is again rebuffed because she has too little evidence to prove Herbert is a killer at all, and because Herbert has a good reputation in the area for working with charities on a regular basis. But time is on Mary's side, and since Herbert opened his second thrift store, his business has become dismal, and charities have ended their work with him. His mental illness has also once again spiraled out of control. His behavior has become erratic. He treats Juliana like a subordinate and often yells at her for no apparent reason. To escape, Juliana has to spend weekends with her children at her mother-in-law's apartment, and she was contemplating getting a lawyer to file for a divorce from Herbert. At this point, Mary once again approaches Juliana for permission to search, and Juliana is reminded of the human skeleton her son found in the grove in 1994, so she grants Mary's request to search. On June 24, 1996, with Juliana's permission, Mary entered the house at Fox Hollow Farm with 3 Hamilton County police officers, who walked around on the garden where the skeleton had been found earlier, and then found what looked like white pebbles in a patch of grass. And apparently, with a good eye, they decided that it was definitely not rocks, but more like bones. A few days later, after a forensic examination, those bones were human bones, so the police sent more investigators to continue the search around the house, and they searched the garden, and eventually found almost 10,000 human bones, which, according to estimates at the time, were the remains of 11 victims. Juliana, as you can imagine, went through a lot. Part of the reason she was able to give her consent to the police to launch a search was because her husband was visiting his mother with their children. But it turned out that the police literally dug up the victims' bones in the house, which meant that the safety of her children was out of control. And she wasn't sure that her husband had seen the news on the television because by this time their home had made local news headlines. But Herbert didn't show up, her kids were safe, and he was the only one who disappeared. On July 3rd, a week after Juliana let the police into the house and search it, police in Ontario, Canada, found Herbert's body. He had shot himself, and he left a 3-page suicide note. In the note, he didn't say whether he'd been involved in the murder or not. Instead, he explained that he had chosen to kill himself because of the failure of his marriage and business, and not because of the revelation of his murderous crimes. The victims located at Fox Hollow Farm have not been fully identified to this day. When the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department called for people to come in and take the DNA test to help identify the victims. But it was known that homosexuality was not recognized in those days. So, as of January 2024, Forensic examiners are also still struggling to identify some of the victims, especially since by 2022, the police had discovered more suspected burial sites for the victims. Herbert, the culprit, chose to take his own life, but there was also no mention at all in his suicide note of the murders he committed, so the full story is not clear to anyone.